Hello, my name is BJ Perez. Welcome to Tapping Into His Treasures. I usually have a theme every week, but this week we're not going to have a theme. We're just going to be kind of all over the map. Okay? I'd like to open today's broadcast by saying hi to the inmates out at Warren Prison. Trying to think of the name of that, Route 97. Hi guys. I was kind of happy to get that little letter telling me that you're watching on Saturday, whatever day you're watching. So, welcome. And this is for everybody, not just for the inmates. Do you know that the three greatest men in all the Bible were murderers? Moses lost his temper and killed an Egyptian. King David was attracted to Bathsheba when she was sunbathing out on her roof and ordered her to be brought to him, and then after she got pregnant, he ordered her husband, Uriah, to be put on the front lines of battle so that he would be killed. The Apostle Paul, who was Saul of Tarsus in his earlier life, persecuted Christians and had many of them murdered. And of all of the good men on earth, God chose those three men to be the greatest men of all the Bible, excluding Jesus, of course. King David failed miserably even after he murdered someone. But guess what? If it were not for his failures, he wouldn't have written the Psalms, and we would not have them to read. There is always redemption in our failures. We all know about the book of Job, and how Job was a good and honest man, and all the townspeople respected him. He had so many terrible things happen to him. We know the story. He had sores all over his body. His 10 kids were killed. His friends were critical of him. But why did the story of Job come about? Do we know that his goodness was centered around his self-righteousness? Did God allow all his suffering because God is sadistical and gets a kick out of watching us suffer? No. He wanted to teach Job that his goodness meant zilch, because it was human goodness. Only godly goodness has value. This story has been passed down to many generations so that we could glean from Job's lessons. The prophet Jonah's attitude was not good at all. Remember the story? He ran away from God, ended up on a ship. They threw him overboard. He ended up in the whale. Well, anyway, our attitudes sometimes aren't much different than his. There's a lot of identification between us and men and women of old. In the New Testament, Peter denied Christ 3 times. Well, probably a lot more than 3 times, but 3 times that are recorded. We're no different from him. We do stuff and we act like God can't even see us. Am I lying? No. A few months ago, I was thinking about, well, I love God's design of the human body. But a few months ago, I just got to thinking of one part of his design that I didn't like. And I was wondering kind of out loud, wondering why God couldn't come up with another plan, another system for us surviving besides breathing, because I've had breathing problems for the biggest part of my life. Well, to me, I was just talking to him like I would talk to a family member, just voicing my thoughts. But that's not how he took it. Because that night, I was invited to a birthday party at my friend's down here at 131, and she has a cat. So I said, I don't think I could come because I have this terrible allergy to animals, to pets. So she goes, well, I'll put the cat in a room and lock the door. So I said, okay. So I went to the party, and even as I sat there and the little grandson blew out the candles of the birthday cake and all that, even though the cat was scratching at the door trying to get out, even though he wasn't right near me, all the dander in the room was going up my nostrils, and I could feel it coming on. And I should have left immediately, and you know how we do stupid things sometimes? It was because I very seldom had any invitations, and I'm alone the biggest part of my life, and it was like a big deal for me to go to this party. So I didn't want to leave. So I waited till after the party was over, and I left, and I came home. And no sooner did I get home, and all of the allergy symptoms started. Oh my God, it was awful. Awful. I had allergy medications, which I doubled up on because nothing was doing any good. And it kept getting worse and worse, and I was searching through my medicine cabinet, came up with something else. I was spraying in my nostrils, and I was in a bad way, and I thought, oh my gosh. I was thinking I needed an antibiotic, or like a sinus antibiotic, and I really needed to go to the emergency hospital, but it was our first snowfall of the year, and it was dark, and by that time I was tired, and I knew I could never drive to the hospital, especially if I hit any slippery patches. Being the first one of the year, I wasn't used to driving in the snow. I was going to call the doctor, but I knew she would have told me to call an ambulance. I didn't want to call an ambulance because I couldn't breathe through my nostrils, you know. So I kept holding off, thinking that the allergy medicine was going to kick in, and it didn't. I went 12 hours unable to breathe through either nostril. If you pinch your nose and try to breathe through your mouth for an hour, you probably couldn't do it. Can you imagine 12 hours not being able to breathe through my nostrils? 12 hours. And I did call the doctor the following morning, and they squeezed me in, and I got a prescription. And I was okay, but the point I'm making is I had to repent. I had to repent of my sin. I treated God like He was common, throwing it out to Him, why couldn't you find another way for us to survive without breathing air through our nostrils? Duh. So I learned my lesson, and hopefully I don't do anything like that again. But I'm saying this to say that all of our actions bring on consequences of one form or another. Recently, very recently, I realized through a message at church that I had fallen into the trap of becoming so jaded by all the things that we hear these days, all the bad things, that I don't get offended by them anymore, by behaviors. And you get what I'm saying? Things used to bother me, but I got so familiar with everything, it's like I just brush it off. I'm not offended anymore. But you know what? God is offended. I may not be offended by these things anymore, but God is offended. So I had to confess that too. We shouldn't go to sleep with all these little iniquities on our hearts. We should confess them before we even hit the pillow. Do you know that God is the answer to all of our questions? Is that neat? If we ask Him, He will tell us who to marry, where we should work, where we should live, where we should go to school, and on and on. Jesus is our Father, our Mother, our Big Brother, our teacher, our doctor, our lawyer, our friend, our confidant, and our soulmate. And how is this for a fact? Every one of our emotions is found in the Psalms. If we belong to Him, then He breathes life into us. There are many things that make us happy as we follow Him, but there are things that happen in our lives that are a result of reaping what we sow, and we blame it on God because we don't want to blame ourselves. Why do some people go through stuff? Here are some questions to ask. Have they judged someone? Have they attacked an anointed servant of God? In the book of Genesis, Moses' sister Miriam became leprous for judging him. She was put outside the camp for 7 days. We can't attack those that are called of God. The Bible tells us not to forsake the assembly of the brethren in Hebrews 10:25. That means to go to church. Do we spend God's time at sporting events every week? The Bible tells us not to give the devil any opportunities. And in Proverbs 18:1, it tells us to make good decisions. The Bible tells us to discern our speech. Do we abide by the teaching of God's Word? Maybe that's why we have problems. Look at how harshly God disciplined David for sleeping with another man's wife, Bathsheba. The degree of that discipline is spelled out in 1 Samuel 6. It wasn't pretty. And let me just throw this in. You don't have to sleep with another man's wife for it to bother God. If you are emotionally involved with the opposite sex at work when you have a wife and children, that's wrong. And you've got to deal with that. This is a really heart-wrenching thing, one of the most heart-wrenching things of my life. Many of you know that I was doing prison and jail ministry for many, many years. I used to go into the Rockland jail, and I came across some young teenage boys there. They were like babies to me. I was like their grandmother. And they would go there straight from juvenile detention. Can you imagine? They would go into juvenile detention when they were like 11, 12 years old. And then they would stay there. And then they would get released and they would go out for a week or two, and then they would go to the jail. These kids shared with myself and with other inmates about their parents, mothers as well as fathers, being on drugs, hard drugs, coke and heroin. When these kids were babies, they were brought up in this atmosphere. Well, of course they're going to end up in juvenile detention. My God, it was just terrible. So if you think of it, please pray for these young people that seem to have no hope except that Jesus Christ is their hope. And He can even find them in juvenile detention and in jail. Please pray for these young people. And I'm going to read a story. It's a little on the long side, but it's very entertaining. And it's about a thorn in my flesh. We all have thorns in our flesh, don't we? And mine is not being able to sleep. No matter where I lived, I've moved 34 times or 31 times. And no matter where I've moved to, I just haven't been able to sleep. Maybe some of you have the same problem. And the only reason I'm reading it is because I just want to make a point about God teaching us through our situations, and He certainly has taught me through all the complaining I've done. And there are several verses in the Bible where it teaches us not to complain. And it's like, when you hear the words of this story that I'm going to read, you're going to think, I had a right to complain. And maybe I did, in a lot of people's eyes, but maybe God was using it at the same time. So the story is entitled, A Thorn in My Flesh. Well, let me just read 3 lines before I get to the story, the beginning of the chapter. This is from my book, The Icing on the Cake. Trials are very difficult to go through, but we would never enjoy or appreciate the good times if we did not experience trials. Trials train us for life's journey. Mine have made me all the more wise and stronger. Here it comes, a thorn in my flesh. Imagine living in a single-family house for most of your entire life, and then having to move into a 2-family house, a 3-family house, a multiple dwelling, and to rent a room and to live with other women in between those times. The dilemma of not being able to sleep undisturbed has been my ongoing thorn in the flesh. It has kept me at the feet of Jesus more than anything else. Please forgive me for using the pages of this book to get up on a soapbox to air the many nuisances. The reason I air them is because the lessons I have learned have outweighed them all. My first baby had his days and nights mixed up, and my last baby was a colic baby. A litany of sleepless nights occurred in between the first and the last offspring during a period of 10 years. When my kids were little, their father worked the oddest shift, 3 p.m. until 3 a.m. Whoever would hire anyone to work that unusual shift, you may ask? A trucking company. He could not fall asleep when he got home, so he'd walk around and eat and whatever until about 3:30, so he could unwind. And during that time, I was awakened and my sleep was broken. And this went on year after year. I washed 28 loads of laundry a week in those days, 4 loads a day. And I hung them all out to dry because I didn't have a dryer. I had 2 babies on the bottle and in diapers at the same time. I would tend to my babies and all my chores in a groggy condition. Does that sound like somebody who is sleep deprived? For the 13 years that I lived in Freeport, Maine, someone would ride by our house on a Kawasaki or Suzuki or one of those rice grinders at 5 o'clock every morning, probably on their way to work, and awaken me out of a sound sleep. I would no sooner doze off again and the alarm clock would go off with a blast, and I would have to wake my former husband up for work. I then had to prepare his breakfast and a bagged lunch. All that I ever dreamed of in those days was sleeping until 7 in the morning. At 7, I would have to wake up all the kids and get them ready for school. I lived for snow days when the kids had the day off from school. Some nights, the neighbor would awaken me at midnight to tell me that our horse was loose and at his house. Not only was I awakened, I had to get dressed and drag one of my sons with me to get the horse. After a traumatic divorce which caused innumerable sleepless nights, I worked the overnight shift at a group home for the mentally disabled. I would have to sleep during the day, which was even harder than sleeping at night due to barking dogs, lawnmowers, and a multiplicity of other annoyances. In the years when I rented rooms from a few different single women, the middle of the night disturbances were of a common nature. The homeowners stayed awake later than I, watching TV and giving no thought to lowering the volume. Or they would talk on the phone without lowering their voices. The son of one landlord took advantage of every time his mother was away on work-related travel and brought friends home and hung out on the back deck talking until 2 in the morning. Because I wasn't allowed to use the air conditioner, I would open my window, it was like 100 degrees, which meant that their voices would wake me up time and again. At other times, this son of the landlord would have parties in the living room, making it impossible to sleep. So Emily Dickinson may have told the world that the sun rises one ribbon at a time, but I dreaded the first peek at the sun on those days. I would drag my tired body to work while my mind lay on my pillow begging for a few more winks. One family I stayed with lived in an apartment complex with heavy iron doors that could wake someone from the dead, and they would slam shut at all hours of the night, making sleep a series of cat naps. Mice have been a major source of sleep deprivation for me all through the years, whether sleeping at others' houses or in some of my own apartments. Not that they were loud, but the pitter-patter of their little feet made it impossible to get a good night's sleep. And then there were the years that I was plagued with carpal tunnel syndrome. Piercing stabs would cause my hands to go numb as I slept until the flow of circulation would stop completely, and I would jump up and run into the bathroom to run water on my hands to get the circulation going. This would happen 10 to 20 times each night until I started wearing leather gloves to bed, which did not eliminate the problem altogether, but decreased the intensity of the symptoms. Even worse than trying to get a good night's sleep in our land of the free and the brave was trying to sleep while living in Cuba. The windows there, I was on the mission field there. The windows there were without glass panes. That's right, you read it right, no glass. I could hear every noise from outside, from the midnight rebel-rousers drunk from tequila to the neighbors chatting loudly right outside my window, until all hours of the night. The worst nights were when the drunkards would go after their common-law wives with machetes. Imagine, an Alfred Hitchcock thriller in the making right outside my painless windows. The 2 young children who lived upstairs with their mother, grandparents, and other relatives would rock in a big rocking chair directly over my bed while watching TV until I put a stop to it at 2 o'clock many mornings. Their dog barked nonstop from 6 in the morning until 11:30 at night. Their pigs squealed in unison, and their roosters joined the serenade at daybreak. Would I ever gain one night's uninterrupted sleep this side of heaven? Neighborhood children sent by their parents would holler in my painless window at 6:30 in the morning, "Do you want to buy any fish?" The toddler upstairs would have a tantrum, kicking and screaming bloody murder, and the man next door would holler, "You'd better stop that crying or I'm going to come over there and cut off your penis." Back in the States, taking care of my mom for 8 months after my brother passed away was just as trying. She was a Yankees fan and would cheer so loudly for her team, often until after midnight, that I would toss and turn until the ball game was over. Then I would have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get ready for work. Trust me, that was not fun. Neither was it fun when she spent 4 months of the year with me in a studio apartment with 1.5 rooms. We had a terrific time together except for overnights, when she would sit in the dark, crinkling candy wrappers when I would try to sleep. Or she would walk across the room and shake me, waking me out of a sound sleep to ask me, "Are you up?" I will never forget the times that I was so desperate for some shut-eye that I tried sleeping on the hard kitchen floor underneath the kitchen table, the only available space to lie down in my tiny kitchen. Mom would wake up during the night, walk into the kitchen, and turn on the light. Then she would go back to her bed, leaving the overhead light shining in my face. When that proved a disaster, I tried barricading her in the bedroom area, leaving her access to the bathroom, while I slept at the foot of the stairs in the front hallway in a 4 foot by 4 foot space. I crammed in the small space with my head on the first step of the stairway. Can you imagine that? That, too, was a disaster because the patrons of a nearby bar gathered in the parking lot outside my door, drinking and drugging until all hours of the morning. After they dispersed, the delivery trucks arrived to make their deliveries, sounding the familiar beep, beep, beep while backing up. So help me, this is no lie. While I lived in Lutherville, Maryland, I lived 6 houses away from a fire station. Normally, with fire stations, there is a fire call. We are all familiar with what they sound like. At the fire station near my house, there was an air raid siren, the same kind used in city emergency drills and I suppose in the military and in wars. The stinking air raid would go off every hour on the hour during the day and at least 3 times during the night. Had I any clue of that air raid before moving there, I would never have rented the apartment. Neither would I have rented the apartment if I knew about the downstairs tenants. Read on. When I moved into that second floor flat in Maryland, the last apartment I lived in before moving back to Maine, I lived upstairs from a man who beat his wife repeatedly, as I mentioned earlier in an earlier chapter. When he wasn't abusing her physically, he yelled at her, degrading and belittling her. He was violent. I witnessed him locking her out of the house in below zero temperatures. He even nailed the back door shut so she couldn't get back in. My calling the police did not help. His wife, in fear of him, denied everything that I told the police, telling them that I twisted things. The fighting went on throughout the night and early hours of the morning for 4.5 years. When I had company over for dinner, we could not even eat our meal in peace. My guests were subject to the neighbors' loud fighting. It was like a nightmare. The guy stormed after me one afternoon, trying to attack me after I beat the horn to get him to stop pulling his wife's hair. I had to call 911 for a policeman to come to escort me to my door. Needless to say, when I moved to Maine in moved back to Maine, I looked forward to peace and quiet and a good night's sleep. Wrong. My first night in my first Maine apartment proved me wrong. First of all, there were 2 separate rentals above me. The guy directly above me was middle-aged and had a very young girlfriend. The 2 of them would slam the front door so hard when they came home at midnight every night that the whole house would shake, waking me out of a sound sleep. I tried leaving the loud, old-fashioned air conditioner on all night, yet the noise overpowered the noise from the air conditioning unit, their noise. His girlfriend would wake me up at 5 a.m. every morning, run the shower, which woke me up, and of course, she would depart with her signature slam, and the whole house would rumble again. Another couple lived upstairs too, but in the back of the house with only their bedroom above me. It was situated over my bedroom. They had 2 cats that jumped on and off the bed all night long. 5 more minutes. The cats jumped off the bed all night long, waking me every time. Worse than the cats was their bedroom noise, which I won't read. My mother had bought me a twin bed. The first bed that I had was able to sleep in for 4.5 years. Up until that time, I was sleeping on my love seats, which were very bad on my back and very uncomfortable. So I get my first bed, and I couldn't even sleep in it because I had to move back out to the couch because of the noise from upstairs. In addition to those 2 neighbors, there was a gymnasium attached to my house in the back. It actually adjoined my bedroom wall. Members of the gym started working out to loud music at 5:30 every morning. I was doomed. You know, I have so much more written here, and I'd love to tell you all. I moved to a couple more apartments, and the noise from upstairs was unbelievable. A young gal who weighed about 250 pounds, which meant the noise was even louder, had all these boyfriends from the Navy base coming at all hours of the day and night, and they'd have drinking parties. And another one fell asleep on the couch every night. She was exhausted from the day at work probably. And the 5-year-old child would run back and forth while her mother slept. The mother would wake up around 11:30, put the baby, little one to bed, go back to sleep on the couch until between 2:30 and 4:30 in the morning, and she'd get up and go to bed, and she'd wake me up every single morning. On and on and on and on. On and on. And even here in a senior complex, the walls are like paper, so I'm awakened all the time. It's nobody's fault. Nobody could help it. It's just that it just hasn't gotten, well, it has gotten a little better now. But anyway, I'm saying all this to say we need to make the best of our situations. And even more than that, last paragraph, through the years of fragmented sleep, God has not only conformed me to His image, He chose the holiness of the night hours to fellowship with me and to allow me to feel His presence much more than I could during the daytime amidst distractions. God has used the night hours to reveal many things to me, and He has redeemed the loss of sleep magnificently. So you get what I'm saying? I know many nights I'd be awakened and I would get tired of trying to go back to sleep and tossing and turning. So I would turn on the TV, and very often it was Christian TV, and I'd get to hear Christian music and testimonies of many, many people who had gone through some really hard times, and they were so inspiring. So it wasn't for naught. You hear what I'm saying? All these interruptions grew me up, and they just filled me with more portions of Christ all through the years. And now, one of the